Do you ever sit and wonder why we consume so much media? For certain genres, the answer is pretty obvious. We watch comedies in order to laugh. We watch horror films in order to be scared, and we consume social media in order to, well, rot our brains. However, those reasons can be seen as quite surface level. Deep down, I believe that people experience stories in order to understand more about the world around them and themselves, whether it be learning more about other cultures, historical events, or even different viewpoints. This can lead to the audience drawing parallels between themselves and the journeys experienced by the characters within these works, even despite the surface level differences that may exist between the two. This, in turn, can teach new lessons like bravery, the importance of freedom, and resilience, helping the viewer by inspiring them to self-reflect and leading to them broadening their horizons. That being said, it's not always so cut and dry. There are other types of media that instead choose to hold a mirror up to our worst qualities, forcing us to confront the things that we'd rather not think about. Our rage, insecurity, greed. While the aim of these stories is to still promote introspection within the audience, it is done through a lens of, well, tough love. Metal Gear is a franchise that needs no introduction.
It was perfect. Perfect.
All the way from 1987 till today, there are very few franchises that manage to define their medium as much as this one has. However, when it comes to the franchise's second entry, which is actually technically its fourth, opinions at the time were mixed to say the least. Of course, this is likely due to the fact that these peons cannot even begin to understand the pure genius of Hideo Kojima, okay? You see, when Raiden goes into a locker and beats his... Oh, wait a second, he can do that? However, with all that being said, in modern times, the game has managed to gain a newfound appreciation, and while I understand why people wouldn't be too fond of it at the time, personally, I love it, even with all of its quirks include.
No, Vamp isn't for vampire, it's because he's bisexual.
If I had to describe in one sentence both how this game works for me and the way it relates to the topic at hand, is that Metal Gear Solid 2 is a game about Metal Gear. Of course, that sounds pretty stupid, but what I mean is that it not only analyzes the franchise and how it has impacted the world within its fiction, but also how it has impacted us within the real world. To be more specific, this game works as both a narrative follow-up to the Metal Gear story, as a commentary on the game's very own creation, and as a reflection of the player that is controlling the central character, not only criticizing them, but also analyzing how the player views this game from their perspective. These three perspectives all coalesce in order to present the main themes of the game, which include how information can be manipulated via memes in order to trap us in cycles, problems with hero worship, and our relationship with legacy. As the game begins, we are reintroduced to Solid Snake. The thickest spy of 2001. The story begins with the standard Metal Gear fare that, at this point, we're all used to, involving Snake needing to perform an infiltration. That being said, however, there are some small subtle details that show the player that things have actually evolved from previous adventures. In previous entries within the series, Snake is working under the US government. However, now he's actually carrying out missions for
Philanthropy now, an anti-Metal Gear organization and officially recognized by the UN.
Of course, alongside his Pookie Bear, Otacon. Snake is now a figure that fights for his own beliefs, instead of merely following orders from a country influenced by propaganda. This leads to Snake being portrayed within this story as almost a voice of reason and as a mentor figure to another character. Showing this development within his personality allows Kojima to use him as a vessel in order to explain the game's themes. This evolution in Snake's personality now actually has gameplay implications, as instead of straight up icing dudes like he did in the original games, Snake has now employed the use of a tranquilizer gun. And not only that, the game's own scoring system in general incentivizes you to not actually kill your enemies. Unfortunately in my case, that won't have too much of an effect. I was never gonna score high anyway. However, in universe, these actions actually put Snake in stark contrast with his father / clone / whatever. Okay, I don't understand Metal Gear story. Seeing as Big Boss seemed to value human life a lot less, considering the fact that he's led many of his own men to their graves. Another interesting thing to note is that throughout this sequence, we have a consistent through line of legacy. To be more specific, we see multiple characters express how important securing a legacy is to them. Both the leader of the Marines and the leader of the GRU are insecure about their perceived lack of impact on the world and how they will be remembered. This portrays a theme of how obsessing over our legacies can lead to our undoings. In the Marines' case, it leads to the creation of Metal Gear Ray, something that in previous games acts as a personification of the destructive nature that comes with war, therefore linking Ray to this almost paranoid view of the future. While some of his dialogue hints to the idea that most of his motivation lies in his desire to bolster the Marines in the world stage, it is also stated that a large part of his motivation is also in his belief that this weapon will secure a better and safer future for his daughter. This also mirrors the motivation of General Gurlukovich. Ironically, it's this obsession that these two men have with their legacies or what eventually leads to their ruination, as the creation of Ray, and in turn the inciting incident of this story, leads to both of their deaths and the deaths of their daughters. However, their fears are being exploited by both Ocelot and at this point another unseen actor, showing how information can be manipulated to control others for the gain of their enemies. While these two men die, the theme of legacy that they introduced within this story are expanded by other characters later on. Anyway, enough of all that yapping. Let's see what's going on with our old pal Snake. Oh shit. I don't think he's gonna walk that one off. Okay, even though Snake is dead, I assure you, dear viewer, the best is yet to come. Our story picks up in the far-flung future of the year 2009, as we are reintroduced to what the fuck? God, this must have been the worst thing to happen to America in the year 2001. Well yeah, in a twist that enraged gamers back at its release, you don't actually play as Solid Snake for the majority of this game. For me, this wasn't that shocking, considering I already had it spoiled that this is the Metal Gear game where you don't play as Snake, just through sheer cultural osmosis. Kind of like the I am your father twist from The Empire Strikes Back. Also, you don't play as Solid Snake in the majority of these games anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. While Raiden isn't as recognizable as Snake is, he does serve another important purpose within this game's narrative. He's literally you. And by that I mean, well, he's kind of a loser.
What are you... What the...
Raiden is intended to be a blank slate that the player can project on. However, unlike other characters that filled this role in other pieces of fiction, such as Luke Skywalker or the Master Chief, the game is actually quite self-aware about this fact and makes it a core part of his story. This is reinforced by his interactions with the other characters throughout the game's events. However, in specific, I'd like to cite some specific codec calls that Raiden can have with Rose. Our first codec call relates to his personal life. Well, to be more specific, his lack of one. The call is Rose recounting an incident that occurred between the two of them, which involved Rose forcing herself into Jack's room, only to reveal it to be
a lifeless room, almost like your empty heart.
Without any kind of personality, not even including commonplace items such as photographs.
Pictures, not even a poster.
This goes to show that, quote-unquote, Jack as an individual does not actually exist, and instead has been completely subsumed by the fantasy of Raiden, which also brings to mind this line that Raiden has when talking to this military guy.
Raiden? Strange code name.
Makes up for the boring one my parents gave me.
It's almost like Jack uses his identity as Raiden as an escape, a way to hide himself away from the harsh reality that is his life. It almost feels childish in a way, as it brings to mind memories of when I'd make believe and pretend to be someone I'm not. Of course, this only ever occurred when I'm a kid. However, for Raiden, this is unfortunately pretty much his entire life, spending so much time pretending to be someone that I was not. Well, actually to this day, you can make the argument that I am still doing this. However, now instead of through action figures and costumes, I am now using interactive media such as video games, almost like the one I'm playing right now. I mean, by experiencing this story, I'm basically assuming the identity of a different person in order to experience some type of escapism, showing how the line between the player and the character is a bit more blurred with Raiden than it is with Solid Snake. I also believe that his choice to be Raiden is also influenced by a desire to have some kind of control over his circumstances, seeing as his legal name, Jack, was bestowed upon him during his time as a child soldier, being derived from his title of Jack the Ripper. To be fair, if I was this guy, I'd probably need some way to cope too. I mean, if I had to spend every day fighting bisexual vampires, meeting Boogie 2988, and getting nut grabbed by the president himself, I'd probably just end it all. Anyway, the unfortunate truth is that despite what Raiden thinks, he actually isn't forging his own path. Instead, he is being used by pretty much every other character within the story. Solidus, who is essentially Jack's father figure, used him as a weapon when he was still a kid. Solid Snake uses him as bait when Arsenal gear is activated, and most importantly of all, he is used by his own government through the guise of Colonel Campbell, aka the AI Colonel, aka the Patriots, aka the Lalilulelo, aka the latter is probably the most important figure within the story, as the Patriots are revealed to be the masterminds behind pretty much everything that has happened up until this point, as they've stood behind the scenes pulling all of the strings. But what I find most interesting is how the AI relates to the things that I've said previously, how the Patriots are presented within the game are almost like all of Raiden's worst traits given life. You see, later on in the game, it is stated by Otacon that Raiden isn't actually talking to an AI version of the Colonel. Instead, this is actually just a manifestation of his brainwaves, however that works, that is used by the Patriots in order to manipulate him. That's right folks, you could say technically it is all in the head. But you're probably wondering why the Patriots specifically use these people in order to manipulate Raiden. Well, the explanation we are given is in the second codec call that I would like to bring up, in which Raiden mentions that he has read a book about the events of Shadow Moses, which, fun fact, is actually in the game, which is just an insane level of detail that he included, a fake book that 3 people have probably actually read. This familiarity is used by the Patriots in order to manipulate Raiden, which is an example of how the media we consume can be used in order to subtly spread propaganda, which, yet again, draws a parallel between the player, as both of us, in a way, look up to Snake as a result of playing these games. However, reality isn't always the same as it is presented within fiction. Raiden learns this the hard way. You can experience a specific codec call where he reflects on the simulations and how they do not equip you to take a human life. However, Jack eventually tries to rebel against his leader and forge a life that he can live for himself, though In order to achieve this task, he must first be broken down in order to be built back up. This occurs on board Arsenal Gear during this now infamous section. Out of context, this might seem funny, well, because it is. However, this is the point of the story where Raiden is at his lowest. He's stripped of his gear, and he is at his most physically vulnerable as the AI kernel in his ear is corrupting, spitting out random insane phrases and regurgitated quotes from previous games. And, you know, it also shows him a video of his girlfriend cheating on him, which is just not cool. On the bright side, at this point, Raiden is experiencing a large change in his life, represented due to his lack of attire, which can be seen as almost a rebirth. And in the end, this rebirth is successful, as he kills the last vestige of his past, represented in the form of Solidus, and is allowed to form a new name for himself away from the battlefield. Well, you know, until he didn't. This relapse is unfortunately inevitable, as the threat of the Patriots still looms over the world, even after this game. However, that's a story for a different time.